Estamos en otra entrevista educativa. En esta ocasión tenemos la posibilidad de conversar con Robert Lenz. Robert Lenz es norteamericano, él es profesor de origen. Hoy día preside el Back Institute, que es un instituto especializado en metodología de proyectos. Por lo tanto, vamos a hablar de esa materia con Robert. How are you, Robert?
I'm fantastic.
Well, maybe we can begin our conversation about this project-based learning methodology, about the origins. What is the history of this methodology?
I've just became the executive director of the Buck Institute 1 year ago. And my predecessor, his last project was writing a book called Setting the Standard for Project-Based Learning. And he spent a good deal of time studying the history of project-based learning. And his name's John Mergendaler. And he went back as far as the Renaissance and was able to find that there were universities and areas of study during the Medici period that was project-based. But most recently, I think we all look to John Dewey as sort of the origin of what we know now as project-based learning, the idea of hands and minds working together. And in the 1970s, I think we had a resurgence of project-based learning. And I was a student at that time in elementary school. And I remember doing projects. And in the talks I give about project-based learning, I share a book of poetry that I wrote and made and presented. And then we hit a nation at risk in the United States. And the project-based learning that was happening in the 1970s seemed to disappear. And then in the 1990s, it reappeared. And it was a time, now I was a teacher, and I was working in a school where we used project-based learning as the way to transform that school, and we got amazing results. I got invited to the White House. We were recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. And then in the early 2000, in the United States, we had the No Child Left Behind law, and project-based learning disappeared again.
They disappear in this case because they have a pressure for other kind of methodologies?
Because the No Child Left Behind was so focused on the standardized test results and a very narrow focus on reading, writing, and math, that teachers felt they had no time to let students do anything other than get ready for what was going to be on the test. And it was at that time I started a network of schools that were project-based. And for 10 years, maybe more, it felt like the wind was just blowing in our face very hard. And over the last 5 years, it's felt like the wind has shifted. And I think there's a growing awareness, not only in the United States, but across the world, that the world has changed dramatically over the last 30 years. And schools haven't. And people are searching for the way to meet that the changing world so they can prepare kids for it. And they're looking to project-based learning. But often they say, oh, this project-based learning is this new thing, project-based learning.
And it's not at all.
And it's been around since the Renaissance. But people have been doing project-based learning around the world quite well for the last 100 years.
What is your definition for a project-based learning methodology?
Project-based learning is our definition, I think of it two ways. One, it's a mindset and a method. And I also would say it's a philosophy and it's a pedagogy. Philosophically and the mindset is that you're putting students in charge of their learning and that you're weighing depth over breadth, and that the work is going to be public, not just something that's academic for the classroom. In the methodology, it's about giving students a challenging problem or question, having them sustain that inquiry. And it's authentic. It's giving them choice, whether they're working individually or in groups. And the products that they make are public. They're not just for the classroom. And there is time for reflection. And those make up what we call our elements of gold standard or high quality project-based learning.
Mm-hmm. And you think that is very different from the traditional methodology that are in place?
I think it's radically different. We think of, often I'll call it that we want kids to be able to know and do and reflect. We have a triangle. And the traditional method right now, what we're very good at in schools is knowing. We know how to teach kids how to know things and have them remember things and regurgitate it back. But what we don't do very well is have them demonstrate what they know or apply that learning. And that's where project-based learning comes in. And even schools that do the doing rarely have kids reflect. And it's in the metacognition and the reflection that students are able to transfer the knowledge and the skills to new and different places. And so we really encourage schools to think about, and teachers, how they're going to build in opportunities for reflection, as well as the kids learning facts and applying them.
Mm-hmm. You think that is a complement of other methodology, or is this a methodology that is unique in a school or in a class?
I think it's very complementary. It's a reframing in some ways as opposed to something completely different. So if you think of taking a project theme or what we like to see people create what we call a driving question that outlines the inquiry the students are going to do. The students, and then they choose a product that the students probably hopefully care about. So it's a question they care about, and it's a product that they know they're going to bring public. Well, the students still need to learn their knowledge and the facts. They still need to learn how to analyze text. They're still going to need to write and communicate. So all the same strategies that you would use traditionally are just reframed and repurposed in a way that students now aren't asking, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to learn it?
Mm-hmm. They practice.
They know that because the question that they're working on or the product they need to create demands it.
Can you give some examples of some good projects and good questions that you...
Sure.
Is for you remarkable in your experience?
Yes. One of the projects that I love that I think is really transferable for any English teacher to team up with an art teacher is a project we called, because of the book we had the students read, was called The Mosaic Retelling of Dante's Inferno. And so seniors in high school, 12th graders, read the Divine Comedy by Dante. And they're asked to choose one level of hell to interpret artistically.
Mm-hmm.
And they can choose the form of art that speaks most to them. So students choose visual arts, both drawing and painting or 3D. They choose performing arts. They choose music. They choose digital arts. And they do that individually or in possibly pairs. And then the whole class has to get together as an ensemble to put on a performance, integrating their art in a storytelling way to retell Dante's Inferno for the audience, thus the mosaic retelling. And then when they're finished, they write a literary analysis of the book, integrating their experience with the art as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we think it's just a great way for kids to get engaged in a piece of literature that normally they would say, why am I reading this ancient piece of work? By using the arts, it just changes it dramatically.
There's another involvement of the students.
Yes, they remember the text. They didn't learn it, and traditionally you would say, well, let's read the text, and then I'm gonna tell you what it means, and you listen and take notes, and now I'm gonna give you a test, or I'm gonna have you write the paper, and you're only doing it because it's an academic exercise. By the time the students who did the Dante Mosaic Retelling Project wrote the paper, they couldn't wait to write the paper because they were so invested in the literature. And as I was saying, that's transferable is because you could choose just about any literature. We've done this project with the Odyssey as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't just have to be that one piece of literature. Having students use the arts as a way to make sense of the literature, I think is a really powerful method.
In general, we talk about this idea of a group for the project. This is well known that this kind of projects are important to develop these skills to work in group and so on. But you talk also about this idea of the personal or individual project. What is the advantage of this type of project?
Well, we believe students need to have both experiences. They need to know how to work in a group, and they have to do that often. But we also believe that students need to be able to manage a project themselves. That when they move, whether they're moving from elementary school into secondary school, but most often moving from secondary into university or into career, they're often going to be asked to manage a project themselves. And in some ways, college is one big project experience of learning how to manage your time and your assignments and your reading in a meaningful way. And we don't think it's too late to wait for students to learn that when they get there. We want them to have that experience while they're younger, so when they don't get it right, we can give them feedback and help them figure it out.
One important thing, talk about the challenges, because it sounds very interesting, this methodology and so on, but what is the type of challenges? For example, I imagine that one challenge can be how to work together for the teachers, no? Because this is integrate different disciplines or matters, and then they can to think together how to evolve a curriculum that is in general is different and separate and isolate in the national curriculum. How do you solve this problem, for example, or maybe others of the child?
Sure, I think the teachers can do interdisciplinary projects or they can do individual projects. Either way, it's very helpful to be and almost mandatory to have opportunities to collaborate with your peers. And so that is a challenge, the way schools are designed right now, that don't give teachers the time to do that. So if a school or a system is going to move towards project-based learning, they're going to have to think about how they change the schedule and the time so that teachers have an opportunity to learn and work together, to design projects or to give each other feedback.
Yes, because it's another requirement of time that.
The PISA test, one of the interesting things they found in looking at the results is that the schools that had the highest PISA scores, the correlation was that they had the most teacher collaboration. It was one of the strongest indicators of success in PISA was teacher collaboration. And that didn't necessarily have to be project-based, just that they're working together. There's also a challenge of the time. So working on a project isn't a short amount of time. Like you don't take 45 minutes and say, let's start on the project, and then say, bing, okay, now we're going to stop the project and you're going to do something else. So schools and teachers need to think about how they can be more flexible and have longer periods of time.
And they organize in this dimension. They organize blocks of
time, or they'll say we're going to do regular school, and now we're going to do project-based learning week or 2 weeks, and teachers get reorganized and kids do it that way. We have to give an opportunity for students to go deep and find their passions and find mastery. And that's going to require a different way of looking at time, whether you do longer blocks, like block schedule, or you take out weeks and you say, we're going to just focus on something of interest and then have a giant celebration at the end. I think there's a real challenge in having to balance the assessments of the standardized test and the assessments that come from project-based learning that are performance-based. And when we're holding students or teachers accountable for the standardized test, yet we want them to do deep projects that prepare them for their future. That's very challenging for teachers to figure out. And often teachers are fearful about taking the time to do the project, so they default to preparing kids for the test.
Wow.
But in fact, most likely, and we're getting more research in the United States that shows that the work on the projects is actually what's going to prepare them for success, because they learn the skills like persistence, and they know or critical thinking and problem solving and time management.
And you have for example, in this methodology, you have their own forms of dimension to evaluate the works of the student, the projects.
Yes.
In this case, for example, in terms of inquire or this kind of new skills.
Yes, and that's and I don't know how much in use in Chile is rubrics. Is that a familiar term?
The rubrics is a familiar term, yes.
So rubrics are critical to the assessment of project-based learning products and artifacts, and it was one of the things that many the Envision schools, which I started, we worked with Linda Darling Hammond and her team at Stanford to create a set of performance tasks and sort of an outline or framework with rubrics that were created in collaboration with the university to verify that the student work would be college ready or accepted in college. So our goal was by the 12th grade, the products that kids produce should be able to be used in their first year of college. And so we have a set of standard rubrics that guide that. And that's really important. Now, in project-based learning, it doesn't mean that students don't take tests, because they're still learning content knowledge. And a good method to find out whether you remember any of the content is to take a short test. So we don't tell people when you're doing project-based learning that there's no more test. We say, take the test, but we also want to see the work assessed using a rubric.
That is excellent. It's a complementary method.
And then I would say and then you collect it to an overall experience into a portfolio. And so you can tell much more about a student's readiness for whatever they're going to do in life by looking at a collection of their work and reflections on that work than a transcript that just lists a bunch of grades and courses. So we really think that's the third area. So you can take a test, do a project, use a rubric, and then create a portfolio that makes the case that you have based on your work, you're ready for success.
Excellent. And maybe a point that is interesting is to think if they have an age which is adequate to develop projects of this kind of methodology. In your view, it seems that it's not necessary in first grade. The first grade that can do excellent projects too, and it's maybe a problem of the type of the contents of the curriculum matters, of the use of technology for these public products at the end. But maybe we can introduce this methodology in all the grades.
Yes, most definitely. First graders, I was sharing earlier today, I shared a video of a first grade project where Austin created scientific picture of a butterfly that if you saw it, you would say there is no way that was created by a first grader. And the butterfly picture actually became a postcard that was sold in travel stops in the state of Idaho. But Austin started with a butterfly that looked just like you would expect a first grader to do. But with feedback and from his peers mostly and his teacher, he was able to revise that 6 times and able to create a piece of work that he was really proud of and was good for public. That was a first grader.
Yes. And you think that this methodology is a methodology restricted to the school, or you can think in an educational system who is managed in terms of this kind of vision or methodology of the schools? I understand that Finland, for example, is trying to move in this direction, You think that that is possible also to think in or reorganize the curriculum or reorganize the educational system in terms of these project-based learning methods?
Yeah, most definitely. I'm excited about what's happening in Finland. They call it phenomenon-based learning. I was meeting recently with an official in the Ministry of Education in Finland, and they are now requiring, it's their first national policy of a requirement that all schools offer every student at least one integrated phenomenon-based learning experience each year. They believe that most schools and students will do more than one, but they think it's critical that every student every year have a deep project-based experience.
At least one.
At least one. And we're actually starting to see some policies change in the United States, state by state, that are now considering project-based learning and the products that come from it as an alternative form of assessment as opposed to a standardized test, or at least in addition to that. So I think we'll see in the next 10 years some movement internationally that will move towards project-based and performance-based learning.
Thank you, Robert Lenz, for this possibility to talk about these project-based learning methods. And as I told you, you have in general last question for all the people that came for this program, for this space. What is about our educational system, our Chilean education, and what can be one advice or one suggestion that you can think is interesting for us to follow in the future years?
I think we can all agree that the world has changed dramatically, that it's more complex, it's very connected, it's more collaborative, and in fact it's probably project-based outside of school, but schools haven't changed and they remain the same. And so my advice to the educators and the political leaders of Chile is it's time to move the policies, to move the schools so that we're preparing kids to have communication skills and critical thinking skills, that they know how to work in teams, that they can be self-directed and manage their learning, truly be lifelong learners, so that because they're going to inherit a lot of challenges in this next century. And I think we owe it to them as the adults right now to prepare them for those challenges. One way to do that is project-based learning, but there's others. And it doesn't really matter, but we need to make the changes to meet the demands of the changing world.
Thank you, Robert Lenz. Bueno, y a ustedes los dejamos invitados para que sigan también los otros capítulos que existen sobre la entrevista educativa en www.educarchile.cl.